Well, it turns out the disreputable state health department bureaucrats were just too incompetent to steal. And which state official who's taking a victory lap over health department revelations might actually could have done something to stop it. Plus, we talk medical marijuana, guns, oil prices, the governor's poor press practices, her puzzling vetoes, and petitions. It's episode 1 of the Mitchell Talks News9 podcast right now on Mitchell Talks, the News9 sessions.
You're listening to the new media. You're listening to Mitchell Talks. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.
The following may contain stories that may cause your head to explode. Aaron Brillbeck and Grant Hermes with News9. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
All right, it was like a time rip in the time continuum this week about what happened. Let's start with the State Department of Health. And if you don't think I'm going to take a moment to say once again, I told you so, you would be wrong. Let's start, Mr. Brillbeck, with the grand jury report. And you were reading it, Mr. Hermes, this morning. What in the world just happened?
That's the question. What happened? Initially, we were told that $30 million was missing and or misspent. It was very vague. The legislature very quickly convened to replace that $30 million. We were told without it, we'd be losing all kinds of state services, that it would be a catastrophe. The legislature provided $30 million. The Department of Health, which was in turmoil at that point, brings in a new director. They lay off 200 people, and we're just told it's a massive mess. And then the grand jury report comes out, and lo and behold, the $30 million was there the whole time.
I was halfway through the report before we started this thing. It's 80 pages long. I had to go back and reread it a couple times because it's not an easy read.
No.
It's not at all. But what happened was there were several accounts that went unpaid for years, and then they were robbing several Peters to pay several Pauls throughout this thing. And the system is so antiquated that they're using there, and it's the way they've always done it. It looked like there was $30 million in missing money, and it was still there. It just didn't show up on the book. And so in the end, it sounds like they were too incompetent to understand what was happening in their own books. So nothing criminal, which is why there aren't any charges that have been brought, and looks like there won't be any indictments at all. I know, Scott, you brought up what happens with the federal money. I didn't hear Hunter say anything about that. Did you guys?
Yeah, with the federal money, the recommendation that's within the grand jury report is to return that money back to the state again.
But no indictments from
No
that.
indictments from it. And I understand the concept behind that, and that it doesn't appear as though there was any criminal intent.
Right.
But it does appear, like you said, just gross incompetence that's been going on for 30 years, 3 decades of gross incompetence. And as they're bringing people on board, and I can't imagine how many different accountants they've had over 30 years, but what it boils down to is these accountants come in, and they're looking at these things from an accountant perspective, and they're told, no, that's not the way that we do things. This is the way that we've always done things. We can't justify why we do them this way, but this is the way that we always do it. We've got 2 separate sets of books, one that we present to the legislature and the governor, and another set of books completely that we operate under. And within that, we've got the slush fund that sometimes has as low as $2 million, sometimes as much as $30 million plus in it. And we use that to compensate for what the legislature may or may not give us. We'll use that for payroll. We can only use it for certain things. And nobody really seemed to know exactly what we can use that slush fund for until we needed the money. It's just kind of a back pocket.
And we should be clear, at least based on the books that I'm reading so far, slush fund is the overarching term for just the amount of money. There's no actual fund.
No fund itself.
It's just the transfers back and forth just accumulated this money. Another part of this, too, and I'll get back to the Department of Health in a second, but some of this has to land on Gary Jones's desk, the Oklahoma State Auditor. How did this not get caught? These are trained CPAs. These are trained people who look at these books. At what point, how did nobody at least look at this and go, something here doesn't match up?
Right.
I don't understand.
Well, from what Gary had said, there's, again, 2 sets of books. The set that was presented to his office matched up. But the set that they were operating under at the Department of Health did not, which again brings forth the question. They obviously know there's 2 sets of books going on. How the board could not have known, it doesn't make sense. How the director, Terry Klein, couldn't have known, it doesn't make sense. So if there's two sets of books they're operating under, how can you tell me there shouldn't be criminal charges?
There's also, they said 30 years.
30 years.
I'm interested in the last 8 because there's somebody else this falls right at their feet, and she holds an office on the 2nd floor. These were her people.
Handpicked.
Here's another story that people don't recognize a lot. Remember when Nico Gomez left the Healthcare Authority? You know how quickly Becky Pasternak-Eichard was appointed as the new Healthcare Authority chief? Do you know why? Because I'll tell you why. Answer the question. Because this same gang wanted to put Ms. Cox Kane in as the Healthcare Authority director. And you know what the Healthcare Authority board didn't want? Another problem like this at the Healthcare Authority. Look, this comes back to the governor. And your point, Grant, about Gary Jones, I've been listening to the Victory Lab. I knew there were problems there. I've been saying it for years that there were problems there. And the fact that yes, by the way, it was 3 elected people, politicians running for office that showed up yesterday. Did you notice that? Right. We told you so, we told you so.
There's a reason for that.
We'll see what the opponents have to say. I do like what Mr. Hunter said. He talked about the gross incompetence. But listen, that wasn't a secret to anybody that had been halfway watching this thing. Okay, this was the gang that couldn't shoot straight. And they're surprised now. I agree with you. I mean, somebody should have caught this. And let me ask you to go down this rabbit hole with me. We see these politicians running for governor. Let's audit this and audit that. When did it become the default that a state audit was state of the art, and that if you ran the auditor and inspector, which I don't understand why we even have one in 2018, because the private sector does it better and for less money. I happen to know this because I've been involved in those types of audits. When did that become the default? I saw Ms. Virgin, Representative Virgin, was going, we should have been putting more money at that auditor's office. Really? Who's going to – somebody needs to step up and say why that office is state-of-the-art and that those are good audits, because I know plenty of people who go, they have no idea what they're doing. And this right here looks to me like a testament to that.
Well, in part because they did defund a lot of the auditors' budget, so it's probably pretty difficult to hire quality people. It's the reason that when you defund a government, you see a lot of brain drain around there. My question is, when we let a private accounting firm in, don't we tread the line of running into what happened in the banking sector with Moody's, where you're paying the people to give you a favorable rating? So if we paid a private auditor to do every state agency, depending on who was doing the paying and which auditor was being picked, if it's a friend of whoever's in office at that point in time, do we run the risk of having favorable audits for who's in power? You know?
That's a good point.
But I think we saw that at tourism, didn't we?
Yes. And that's, which, by the way, you notice that big investigation, what happened to that?
Just disappeared.
Gone, right?
Disappeared.
So can we talk about one more person or one more group of people that it lies at their feet? How about the board?
Sure.
Good question.
Grand jury took a shot at them.
Right.
Actually, and I'm paraphrasing here, was it's good some of them are leaving. Did you notice that in the grand jury report? Maybe we could get some unsuspecting university to hire a few of them. Who knows how this stuff works?
But you're right. They've been largely silent on this from day one. They refused to answer questions from the media about this, the board. And was it a question of, most of them have medical backgrounds, not numbers backgrounds. That's a problem because this is an agency that relies on numbers. It also relies on medical professionals, but there should be a better mix than that.
At least for the people who are running the finances should have a numbers background.
Right.
That would just make sense. You would want that in any organization that has to deal with money.
But even without the numbers background, they've got to be looking at the books and saying, hey, this doesn't add up, man.
Right. And we were saying earlier that maybe the one truthful thing throughout the entire set of investigations here is that the workplace environment at the State Department of Health was toxic. You don't get to a place where people know this is happening and they're not dumb people. They can see this is happening, and they don't report it because it's the way they've always done it because of constraints that are in the workplace. It was apparent that it was toxic, and we learned that in the legislature's sets of hearings and investigations.
Right,
which, by
Josh
the way,
Cockcroft.
how did none of this get uncovered in those hearings?
Right.
Were they poorly led? I don't know.
Well, the speaker has said in a statement yesterday they want to go back and look and see if somebody wasn't lying to them. Yeah, there's you some. Were they under subpoena?
They were under oath.
So if they lied then they could be facing perjury charges.
That's correct.
Isn't that be interesting? It's kind of like this thing happening on the national level. Most of these people, there's not a whole lot of Russia stuff, but so far people are getting convicted of lying to the FBI.
But let's be honest. Do you think that's really going to happen? If the Attorney General is saying, yeah, we're not finding any cause for any criminal charges, do you really think that anybody's going to be facing any perjury charges?
Depends on if he's the Attorney General come a year from now and what the statute of limitations would be. Let me ask you guys, and we'll go to something that's even more fun, I think. Where's this story going? Will it fizzle and die, or is this going to be a campaign issue?
It'll be a campaign issue.
Yeah, it's got to be a campaign issue.
Absolutely. I mean, there'll be calls to change the laws to prevent people from being able to do this. They're talking about a possible special session to call back to return this $30 million, which would be hand in hand with, I think, what we're going to talk about next, which is medical marijuana. And also Nathan Dom's calling for another special session this year. I don't want to call it a second. It'd be like, what, 8? I don't know what number we're on now.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We've lost track.
Aaron's hair is so gray from all these special sessions. But like, they would all fall into the place for that. So maybe another special session to talk about this money, because I guess we can just live with maybe $30 million that we had to appropriate. I don't know.
Well, I would assume that it's incumbent upon the Department of Health to return that money back to state for general appropriations. That's where it came out of. That's where it would go back to. If they didn't, I mean, they're going to be facing even more scrutiny if that's possible. But that was the recommendation to the grand jury, is to return this money. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. They haven't spent it. It's just kind of sitting there in an account.
My other question here is that, and this kind of gets into more of the midterm election stuff, but is this a common practice at state agencies? In the way that, I mean, you have agencies who don't fill positions because they know that they're going to need money as a cushion when the legislature inevitably comes knocking to cut their budgets. And part of this in the health department is some of that, is them shuffling funds around to make it appear as though they're efficient. Do you think this is a common practice? And that's a problem with state funding and revenue? I
think it's got to be, honestly. And we talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of this this group that's come out, this grassroots group that is trying to defund among other things, the teacher raise, arguing that there's potentially money through fraud and misuse that could be used for teacher raises instead. So they're trying to overturn this 1010XX. The group is Oklahoma Taxpayers United.
Senator Coburn's group.
And what they're looking at doing is saying, hey, wait a second, we don't have to raise taxes. We've got the money. And honestly, this sort of bolsters their argument a little bit. We don't know if there's $600 million plus, but we just, the bottom line is we don't know. How widespread is this? How common of a practice is this among all of the state's agencies to have two sets of books? One that we show the legislature, the governor, and the auditor's office, and the other that we operate under. My suspicion is it's probably more widespread than a lot of people are talking about.
So the two of you, this is a question because I really don't know the answer to this. Is the problem that creates these kind of problems of a lack of funding to these agencies, a lack of revenue in the state, or is it just a lack of quality people in the agencies?
I think in the case of the Department of Health, it's the former, not the latter. I think it's a question of the board is, again, made up of medical professionals, and they care for people. That's why they're doing what they're doing. And there's a lot of things they wanted to do that they were restricted from doing in terms of services for the most needy Oklahomans. On one side, they want to help. On the other side, the legislature is saying, hey, we're only giving you so much money. So the solution is, okay, let's just kind of have a couple extra bucks set over here to take care of the things that we want to be able to take care of.
In Texas, they have staff full-time that does this. And you talk to any lawmaker, I know you have, Aaron, when it's exactly right, whenever we start having those budget hearings, which are just nonsense every year, they have to trust what they're being told.
Right.
That's insane. What's our budget? $7-8 billion or something like that. It's just insane. You want to get to medical marijuana? This is
dude.
By the way, I'll just tell you this. You're listening to this, you can make your joke about needing medical marijuana and the fact that we're talking about having another special session. Make your own joke, your own memes about this. But is this a serious deal? Listen, I know leadership is resisting this
hardcore.
It's interesting, the group that's pushing back against this too right now, that coalition that was put together, those aren't nothing folks. Those are serious hitters. It's chambers of commerce, it's state medical board, it's state pharmacist board. I mean, they all have their interest in those things, but those are people who bend ears. So where this will go, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch because, again, we've got this on the ballot. It's going to be voted on. I think most people believe that it's going to pass, but the legislature hasn't acted in any way in terms of how it's going to be controlled. So we don't know how it's going to be distributed. We don't know what the requirements are going to be for distributing it. We don't know where it's going to come from, how it's going to be grown. We know none of these things. And even if it passes from the legislature, as we saw from 780, 781, the legislature, even though something can be passed by the people, the legislature can ultimately have control over how it moves along.
I've been hearing those exact same echoes, too, as I've been listening to and reading stories about the development of 788. It just sounds like we're going to hit another repeat of the criminal justice reform referendums that we passed last election and back in 2016. There's no real mandate to say that they have to implement the law. It's just going to be kind of this boondoggle if they don't do something about it.
And we've seen some criminal justice reform, but it certainly isn't what people thought that we were going to see when they walked into the ballot box. Not even close.
Should be noted that the House passed some framework dealing with this on the front end, and the Senate refused to hear it.
Right.
And here's another thing that's ominous for the pro-788 side. That no campaign is going to be run by Pat McFerrin, who's like Hulk and Thor in the same person. For those folks who remember that the David Boren plan was going to pass overwhelmingly, the guy who ran the no campaign on that, Pat McFerrin. He's a bad man, okay? Also, we should say, while we're on the note of weed, there's now a ballot initiative being circulated. Did I get that right? About making it full-blown
recreational marijuana
on the ballot.
And the reason that they're doing that is that would make a change to the Constitution, and that would make it so that the legislature would not be able to put in the regulations that may be put in regarding medical use of marijuana. So what their argument is by doing this, by making it across the board recreational, so anybody who's 21 and over can use certain amounts on a recreational basis, that would prevent the legislature from creating any type of laws and regulations that would prevent people who need medical marijuana from getting it.
All right, when we come back with Grant Hermes and Aaron Brillbeck, we're going to talk about another issue about ballot initiatives and what does $80 a barrel oil do for the state of Oklahoma. Be right back. Hope you're enjoying this Mitchell Talks News 9 podcast. Check out our TV segments, Hot Seat, where I go one-on-one with the state's top newsmakers on Saturday, and on Sundays, Your Vote Counts, Oklahoma's most watched political showdown. Both of them, 7:50 a.m. Saturday and Sunday. And keep up to date with all our Mitchell Talks productions. Go to the Mitchell Talks Facebook page and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks. And we're back with Grant Hermes and Aaron Brillbeck. As we tape this on a Friday. I'm waiting to see what we brought the governor into this issue a while ago with the state health department. I'm wondering how far after 5 o'clock today her press release will be issued about this. You guys want to let them the public in, our listeners, into why that you don't do stuff after 5 o'clock on Friday, or why you do?
Why you do? Okay. She is infamous for doing the 6 p.m. news dump. That's when she's going to veto the controversial bills. She did it last week with the gun bill 1212. She vetoed that it was 5:54 p.m. It was just before we're all about to go on the air and talk about it, because she knows full well that we're not going to have time to run it on Friday night, and then Saturday and Sunday viewership is down, and by Monday it's going to be forgotten and something else is going to be picked up. I mean, there's a reason that she's doing what she's doing when she's ditching these controversial bills last minute on a Friday.
Right. It's also past print deadlines,
Yep.
too, at that point. So anything that's going to run, it might not be past the web deadlines, but it's certainly past the print deadlines for that day and the following day. So if she does it on Friday, you won't see it until maybe Sunday at the earliest.
So, Grant, let me bug you on this 1212 bill. What was your take on her vetoing it, despite it having pretty powerful passage in both the House and Senate?
I was surprised, given her history with gun legislation, given her rating with the NRA. I was surprised at her veto of this. She did get herself in good with with members of the chamber, which I think she has not had an awesome relationship with in the past several years. And then it helped bolster her relationship with law enforcement. There's an element, too, of this that she gets to veto bills like this as a lame duck governor. It's not uncommon for governors to do that. But I was a little surprised.
Here's my tinfoil hat take on it. This is an election year. There were a lot of legislators that I know of that did not want this bill to pass, but they went ahead and voted for it anyhow because you're in Oklahoma. The last thing you want to do is appear as a politician to be anti-gun in any way. My suspicion is there was a deal that was made where the legislators said, hey, we got to get reelected. We've got to pass this. But, Governor, would you be willing to fall on the sword as a lame duck governor and just veto this thing so that we don't have it?
It's political cover for members of her own party.
Yep.
So did you talk to folks up at the Capitol about this, and they said they didn't like this bill, and
Yes.
then they turned around and voted for it anyway?
Yes.
Isn't that a bigger problem?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Absolutely. Because the whole thing becomes about politics and not about policy.
Right.
And that's the problem. And that's a problem that we're seeing consistently here in Oklahoma. It's more about politics than it is about policy.
Wow. I'm pretty much blown away by that, which we talk about all the time. By the way, you want to mention the adoption bill? It's 1140, right? Or the foster?
Yes.
Yes, 1140.
So I saw where Troy Stevenson and some others were talking about doing some maneuver to put that on the ballot or a recall. What was that about?
Yeah, it's a ballot initiative to get it to get it unvetoed, essentially, and that I believe would make it law, but would put it back into play next year.
Right.
Is that how that
It
would
wouldn't be a constitutional amendment. It would put it back into play. But I don't know if that's necessary because it can be brought up again next year anyhow.
Right. Also, a side note, apparently yesterday, Dr. Phil of Dr. Phil fame caught wind of this and called the governor out on Twitter for it and saying,
Whoa.
Yeah.
You done ticked off Dr. Phil, Governor.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I thought that was interesting because part of her legacy here is the Pinnacle Plan and the work that she's done with foster kids alongside A.J. Griffin, who's now a former senator at this point. She's not running for re-election. So it's interesting that bill seems to be at odds with her work in adoptions and foster care agencies.
Right.
And one of the high-ups at DHS in charge of that program leaving, saying it's too much, the Pinnacle Plan's too much.
She said it was the hardest job in government in Oklahoma to run the child welfare services.
You know who used to scream and rail about the Pinnacle Plan? Richard Morissette. Remember those days?
Yeah.
He was always, you got to break DHS up. It's too big.
Does Richard Morissette speak in an even tone, or does he always yell?
You have to watch your levels a lot with Richard Morissette. So let me shift real quick to the fact that this Dr. Coburn effort is moving forward. And there's been some discussion about the school districts. Should they go ahead and give the raises?
Right.
I don't even know where that's at. But what if that thing were to go on the ballot and people were to roll back that tax increase? What happens?
That's part of the problem. That's why a lot of school districts are holding off on their raises. And that's what makes it tough, is because this is the time when school districts are hiring teachers. This is the time when teachers are signing contracts. How do you put that into a contract if you don't know for sure the money is going to be there? And that's part of the problem. So a lot of districts are holding off on even writing that into contracts. And the whole reason for doing this $6,000 raise was to try to draw more teachers to Oklahoma and keep those that we have here in Oklahoma. But how do we do that? How effective is it when we say to them, yeah, we'd love to hire you, and there's a chance that maybe you'll get $6,000 or maybe this will be successful and you won't. Now, the folks who are behind this effort are saying the raises are still there. We just have to find a different way of paying for them if this succeeds. And they're saying through waste, fraud, and abuse, $600 million, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't seen any numbers to say that through waste, fraud, and abuse, we can come up with $600 million.
I've also asked them several times. I'm probably going on 4 different attempts to get a hold of somebody from Oklahoma Taxpayers Unite about where they think the money is. 660 is a specific number. It's not around 100 million, it's not around 700 million. It's a specific amount of money, specific enough at that large amount of money that they have to have some kind of idea of which accounts should be rated when and where.
Right.
So I'd like to hear back from them if some of them are listening to this.
And I asked them during their press conference, where specifically are you looking? And the answer was, well, we got to look at all agencies. Well, I get that. We have to look at all agencies, but how are you coming up with $660 million plus? That's a whole bunch of cash. And this might help bolster their effort, what we just saw recently with the Department of Health, because they can make the argument, look, $30 million, we have it, we don't have it, we have it again, we don't have it. It's such a mess over there that it certainly bolsters their argument that it's hard to follow the money trail with any of these agencies. And they're right to a certain degree. I agree with them 100% that we really need to look at where the money is in these different agencies. But do we do that to the peril of giving these teachers the raises that we've promised them?
It'll be interesting as well to see. So should this pass in November, what happens then to the state of teachers in Oklahoma? Do we see teachers that were up at the Capitol start just fleeing in droves, just emigrating from Oklahoma to other states because they can't trust the people that they elect to put up there to keep to their word and to make sure that their promises don't get broken by other people? I don't know. I mean, there's an effort right now by a handful of school districts, including Oklahoma City Public Schools, to give teachers and support staff Election Day off. OKCPS just passed that, so next year they're going to have Election Day off on November 6th, which, if other districts follow suit, that could have an impact on it. I don't quite know. But it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward with the kinds of people who stay and don't stay if this thing passes.
Right. And again, even if it does pass, the law is still in place where the teachers will get the raise. There's just no funding mechanism for giving it to them. So then it's incumbent upon the legislature to try to find the money somehow.
And in the meantime, we're trying to hire teachers in the state without really a guarantee of when they're going to get that money.
Right. Now, there's nothing to preclude the legislature from, if this thing does pass, from passing another tax increase to fund it. They can certainly do that. This would just do away with the one that's currently there. But again, at this point now, we're just, we're chasing our tail.
I'm just envisioning this like endless cycle of like raising taxes and teacher walkouts, and then a referendum to undo it, and then raising taxes and just
it's special session after special session after special
indefinite session. Yeah,
and I think that voters may not be perfectly in tune with the complete ins and outs, but what voters are seeing is a very high level of incompetence right now up at the state capitol. They're seeing special session after special session after special session. They're seeing a lack of transparency. How is this going to play out come Election Day?
Guess what's not on the ballot right now? Some sort of alterations to State Question 640. Which was talked about all session long, right? And maybe because of this following. Get down to our last question. I've got actually two more, but about this one. As we record this yesterday, oil was almost at $80 a barrel. About 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, Chad Warmington, the Oklahoma Oil and Gas Association, was in. We were talking about scoop and stack. And he was saying, look, scoop and stack is going to be the thing that'll get us out of our budget problems if the government does something, I'm paraphrasing, something stupid. What he meant at the time was raising GPT.
Right.
Okay? So oil goes to nearly 80 on Thursday. Earlier in the week, the governor vetoed this legacy fund, is that what they called it? Vision fund or whatever it was. The irony is pretty rich there. Could you help us understand what it was she vetoed and what it was going to do? It was to save. My understanding was it was to save excess money, and when it was raining,
right,
it was like a savings account.
It's kind of a rainy day account. It's setting aside a certain amount of money for when the inevitable happens, the ups and downs with oil.
But it's moot now, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll see where that goes. All right, last question today is, you mentioned, Grant, a while ago about the superintendents, some of these big districts turning out on Election Day. We're watching the dissolution of legacy media in this state. You, Mr. Brubeck, were the first television reporter to be assigned to the Capitol
25 years.
In 25 years. Yeah. As nutty as that sounds, there were no TV people at the Capitol.
Which is crazy.
We've watched print. The old legacy print it's on life support. Can I be blunt about that? Radio is gone in Oklahoma for all practical purposes. People are listening to Sirius XM, and they're getting their news from things like Twitter, their Facebook feed, until Zuckerberg screws that up. So the question then becomes, that I'd like to ask you guys, and then move into it and we go next week, who is going to influence voters? Now, let me just take two things out, politicians and media. So if you take those out, and I started asking friends this week, it's the most interesting exercise I've ever done. Who will be the influencers in the primary and especially in November?
Well, whoever can pay to reach people at the places they are. I mean, if you're talking about an infusion of money to certain groups from folks in the oil industry or folks from the Chamber of Commerce, or you see a large university get behind something and excite their students and the bases that go along with those kinds of crowds, I think those are the people outside of the politicians and the media that will be able to influence how the midterms look.
I agree to a certain degree, but I also disagree to a certain degree. When we saw the business leaders step in and try to influence politics at the Capitol, that fell flat on its face. It was a good attempt, but it died. So I don't believe that it's necessarily who has the most money. What we did see with the teachers, one thing that they did very successfully was the use of social media. That whole thing, much as OEA wants to take credit for it, what that one boiled down to was you had one teacher who set up a Facebook/Twitter account and just really rallied the troops to the point where even he was surprised by the amount of response that he got. And these folks were just, they looked at him as a leader, even though he didn't really look at himself as a leader. He was just a guy setting up an account. And that was what really mobilized teachers and subsequently mobilized students and eventually pushed the legislature, I believe, into a position where they were. Now, granted, during the walkout, exactly nothing happened. There was no increase in the amount of pay and the amount of taxes. Nothing happened as a direct result of the walkout, but it was concerns leading up to the walkout and the legislature trying to avert a walkout and the pressure that they saw because of social media that led to the changes that we saw.
Do you think there's enough people out there to really change the way voters have acted for the past 3 decades in Oklahoma that are like that? I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if there are that many opinion leaders out there that have that kind of ability here.
And I think you're hitting on something. This is still very much in its infancy. And for this particular primary, this particular election, I don't think that we're going to see the impact, but wait a couple of years and you're going to be seeing a lot more influence from social media as people learn how to organize a little bit better. But if they can organize in such a way that, for example, the teachers did, we're going to see grassroots movements where we're not going to be having to rely so much on cash for advertising, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of this stuff is going to be done for free, and a lot of this is going to be done word of mouth. My concern with that is that when you get into the social media realm, oftentimes there's misinformation, quote-unquote fake news, that's driving the narrative. That's my concern going into it, and I don't know how that would be controlled. Also
hand in hand with this, sorry, Scott, I know you were going to say something there, but is that we're seeing higher levels of civic engagement than we have in quite a while in Oklahoma. If you talk to folks, Andy Moore, who I'm sure is going to be a friend of the podcast from Let's Fix This.
Fix This,
sorry. I've been up for a very long time. And other folks who work with would-be voters hand in hand, they're seeing more people who normally wouldn't get involved. So maybe come 2020, we'll see those people be better geared up to do the kind of thing.
But let me ask you this too, and it's the cynic in me speaking. Is that just a fad? Is that I want to get involved because I want to wear the T-shirt and I want to be involved in a march? Or are people actually getting involved, knowing the topics, knowing the ins and outs, knowing who their legislators are? I was surprised at the Capitol when I was talking with the teachers and other folks that were there supporting the teachers, how many of them had no idea who their legislator even was.
True. And I think that's part of that is still also this thing is in its infancy as far as civic engagement goes. I don't know where this goes. I don't know if you're right. I don't know if this is an ongoing trend. But if you go to some of the meetings where these people are at, or you listen to the voicemails that are left on lawmakers' phones, some of these people know what they're talking about.
Yep.
And so depending on how this trend goes, I don't
But is a lot of it just, I want my selfie posted on Facebook with me standing in the middle of a crowd being part of something big, or are people actively getting involved?
I don't know the answer to that question. I really don't. So
I know that during the teacher walkout, I would watch people on their Facebook Live, and Zuckerberg will screw this up. But
careful, he's listening right now.
Yeah, he is, through my phone. Here's the thing. When Scott Inman would throw on a Facebook Live, 75, 80,000 people.
Right.
Corey Williams would do a Facebook Live, 40, 50,000 people. Republicans are way behind on this. And
yes.
they tend to think that Twitter, Facebook, some of those are where more liberals are. Here's the thing. Last week I asked Keith Gaddy on Hot Seat, I said, is Oklahoma turning purple? He said, yes. And money's being spent. I will let me quote my friend Trey Savage over at Non-Doc, one of the 4 or 5 really great reporters at the Capitol, present company included. He's like, you guys in Oklahoma, you want to support local journalism, you got to quit sending all your money to Palo Alto. But it's a fact now. People are using Facebook, they're using Twitter, they're pushing this stuff out there. This is where the crowd is heading. And I would say this is what you want to support. I mean, I don't go to a newspaper to see Paul Money's. He's at Oklahoma Watch now, right?
Right.
So I'm getting my Paul Money story on my phone. I'm getting push notifications from Channel 9. I'm seeing what Hermes, the law firm of Hermes and Brillbeck, are sending me. I'm getting it on my phone. People are watching this, and a lot of these millennials, they're just not watching TV. They're getting it on the News9.com site. So I'm really interested as we move forward talking about who the influencers are going to be, because editorials and legacy newspapers ain't getting it done. Okay, it's just not happening. And even the legacy newspapers are trying to do different stuff, but digital's way out in front.
And you're right about the Republicans, as is often the case here in Oklahoma. They're way, way, way behind as far as getting the message out. And you're right, Scott Inman, he knew how to play the game both on the floor and on social media. And the Republicans are, again, failing on that side.
Yeah, probably the best at that is Mike Sanders, the majority leader.
I would agree.
Over there. And I mean, he does for his constituents. I see his stuff all the time. Well, thanks, gentlemen, for this. Our first podcast from News9 and Mitchell Talks. Next week, let's talk more about the influencers, and we'll see the 5 o'clock press releases. We'll talk about those next week.
Looking forward to that one.
Thanks again, guys.
You're listening to the new media, the Mitchell Talks Network. Learn more at MitchellTalks.com and follow me, Scott Mitchell, on Twitter at MitchellTalks.